program is made possible in part by Wilbur Hot Springs, a health sanctuary and nature preserve located in Colusa County, California. As many of you know, Wilbur has been a place for me to rest and replenish for decades. It's completely off the grid, a natural, pristine health sanctuary where it is said, in all the world, no waters like these. This year especially, it's vital to take time to unplug, to be with nature, and to focus on personal well-being. It's absolutely essential to maintaining a healthy sense of self. I suggest you step away from your devices, take a deep breath, imagine the birds singing, the sun shining, and warm water, the warm medicine water of Wilbur enveloping you. There's no better place than Wilbur Hot Springs for a change of scenery. I highly recommend that you visit wilburhotsprings.com and book your stay today. Welcome to Mind, Body, Health, and Politics. I am your host, Dr. Richard Lewis Miller. The mission of Mind, Body, Health, and Politics is to stimulate thought, expand consciousness, and encourage community. I say encourage community because I believe that the vast majority of humans are friendly tribal animals. And when we live in small enough communities in which we know one another by name, we are collaborative and we sustain everyone in our community. Today, it is my honor and privilege to bring you a conversation with Governor Jerry Brown. When Governor Jerry Brown retired from office after making California an American history by serving as governor for 2 separate 8-year terms, he moved back to his ranch that his family started in 1857 in Colusa County. The Brown Ranch is down the road a piece from the health sanctuary I started at Wilbur Hot Springs, also in Colusa County. I founded it in 1972. Being neighbors in a remote area of the county, we've gotten to know one another, and today it is my distinct honor to bring Governor Jerry Brown to you. Stay tuned for what I'm confident will be a conversation worth listening to and for some of you participating in. To participate, you can text or call in at 650-TALLY-HO. That's 650-TALLY-HO. TALLYHO. But first, my usual news and notes in psychology and medicine. We are living in an age of mistrust and anxiety. Anxiety and fear abound. People are mistrustful and anxious about their ability to provide for their family. Millions, multiple millions, are out of work. People are mistrustful and anxious about their government. There is abundant evidence that the President of the United States is a chronic pathological liar, and now he is disrupting the democratic process by refusing to recognize the man, Joe Biden, who just defeated him in the presidential election. The present president has created mistrust and anxiety about the reports of science. Both the Center for Disease Control, the CDC, and the FDA have waffled on their information to the public and appear to have at times been acting under political pressure from the federal government. In other words, instead of reporting science, they're reporting what the president tells them to report. People are mistrustful and anxious about law enforcement. Police are seen shooting unarmed Black Americans in the back. People are mistrustful and anxious about our financial system. The government is printing money to pay for the pandemic, whose treatment it painfully has botched and continues to botch. People are mistrustful and anxious about climate change. 99% of the world's scientists believe we are going through dramatic climate change caused by our release of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. The President of the United States does not believe in climate change. People are mistrustful and anxious about the honesty of the media. Two news programs of the same event often bring the public two very different stories. People are mistrustful and anxious about being in close contact with one another. This may be the most pernicious of all. In a recent study, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention analyzed information from more than 5,400 US adults ages 18 and older who completed an online survey in late June of 2020. The percentage of Americans reporting symptoms of anxiety disorder increased about threefold, and the percentage reporting symptoms of depressive disorder increased about fourfold, compared with levels seen in a survey conducted around the same period a year ago in 2019. Overall, we are seeing increases in marijuana use, in alcohol use during the pandemic. Symptoms of anxiety and depression include poor sleep, loss of interest and pleasure, less reaching out to friends and family, helplessness and/or crippling anxiety, and suicidal thoughts. And overriding all of this mistrust and anxiety is that more and more people are generally mistrustful and anxious about what, if anything, can be believed in the world around them. Nothing can be believed, some people are thinking. For the past 15 years, Mind, Body, Health, and Politics has proven that we bring you information you can believe. We will continue to do so. Our prominent and esteemed guests will be carefully vetted for their integrity prior to appearing on the program. We will bring you information on the most important topics of our time, be they seeming to be large or small. Our topics will include, but not be limited to, climate change, nuclear proliferation, the COVID pandemic, socioeconomic stratification, the obesity epidemic, artificial intelligence, civil war, communal living, firearms rights, human sexuality, misogyny, human slavery, psychedelic medicine, racism, resilience, single parenting, socialism, and fascism. And if you have more topics, text them to me or call 650-TALLY-HO. Today's program will be on the two most existential of all the issues, because each one alone could cause the end of life on our planet: climate change and nuclear proliferation. Of course, we will also talk about the presidential transition. Now for our interview. And remember, if you want to text or call in, the number is 650-TALLY-HO, 650-TALLY-HO. In 1974, I was living at Wilbur Hot Springs, and I heard about a man my age named Jerry Brown, who was a candidate for governor of California. I learned that his family had lived down the road a piece from Wilbur since 1857. Some research revealed that more than any other politician of my lifetime, Jerry Brown represented my social and economic views. Soon after, for the first time in my life, I attended a political fundraiser. I met the candidate, Jerry Brown, and donated $500, present value $2,639. And that was a great deal of money for me back in 1974. Later that year, Jerry Brown was elected to his first of 4 terms as governor of California. Many of Governor Brown's top appointees, such as Sim Vanderin, Bill Press, and Huey Johnson, frequented Wilbur Hot Springs, and I got to know them personally. They were people of integrity. I opine that Jerry Brown may be the only honest politician in America. He simply tells the truth. This year, Governor Jerry Brown retired after his second 8-year term as governor of California. He moved back to the family farm in Colusa County, and once again, we are neighbors. This past New Year's Eve, Governor Brown and his wife Ann spent the evening with Jolie and myself at Wilbur. It is because of these connections that I have the privilege of bringing you today's conversation with my good neighbor, Governor Jerry Brown. Governor Brown served as Secretary of State of California from 1971 to 1975. He was then elected governor of California in 1975, making him at 36 the youngest governor in 111 years. After serving as governor for 2 terms in his 30s, from 1975 to 1983, he later served another 8 years as governor in his 70s, from 2011 to 2019, making him both the longest serving governor in California history and the 3rd longest serving governor in the history of the United States. In between his 8-year governorships, he served as mayor of Oakland, 1999 to 2007, and he also served as California's attorney general from 2007 to 2011. After serving office, Jerry Brown has run the California China Institute at the University of California, Berkeley, and served as the executive chairman of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. We want to hear something about that today as well. Welcome to Mind, Body Health and Politics, Governor Jerry Brown.
Dr. Miller, good to be with you from afar.
From afar.
You're not that far away. Fort Bragg to West Colusa.
Right now, I am in Fort Bragg. I drove over from Wilbur Hot Springs last week. Well, we know what the topics are because I know that there are 2 topics that are central to your life at present. One of them is climate change, and the other is nuclear proliferation. And you heard me say that I'd also like to talk a bit about the presidential transition. Which one of those 3 would you like to address first?
Well, we probably ought to start with the presidential campaign, since that's what's on everybody's mind and what's coming through Twitter on an hourly basis.
Okay, let's do that. Share some of your thoughts about what's going on. What do you think should be going on, and where we're headed next?
Well, what I see going on here is a very divided America, although we ought to recognize that this election was really not all that close. Joe Biden's going to win probably by more than 5 million votes. In percentage terms, it's about 3%, and he's over 50%, which is something a number of recent presidents have been unable to achieve. But in the face of all this, it's pretty clear that America is very divided, that people who vote for Trump are very strong in their convictions, and they have very different beliefs than people who are voting for Joe Biden. In fact, many of them, when told by Trump falsely that Trump won, they believe that. And so we're getting into a kind of a post-fact world where the facts are being subordinated to beliefs. And the beliefs are being manipulated by people like Trump and other propagandists, often on Fox News, but Limbaugh and other places. That's my point of view, and I'm pretty sure I'm right. On the other hand, there are millions, tens of millions of people who see it another way. As a matter of fact, one of them or 2 of them, one evening last week, put a Trump 2020 banner on my red barn, which I didn't discover for a day. So I was advertising for President Trump, but I found it and took it down in a good spirit. But what does all this mean? It means that the American society is split right down the middle, that in face of these big challenges, nuclear danger, climate change, the international competitive world, the financial system, poverty, inequality, all that stuff. You don't solve that with a divided country. So somehow Joe Biden is going to have the job, and I think he's got a good preparation for bringing the country together, but still forging ahead, because dealing with the problems that we face take wrenching change. If you want to stop the nuclear juggernaut of more and more nuclear weapons, then that's going to go against the military industrial complex. It's going to go against the money and power of companies like Boeing and General Dynamics and Northrop Aviation and powerful interest groups. For example, the IC select the outcome. That would be a very radical outcome, but I give it at least a small possibility. So hold on to your chair here. We're not yet in the promised land of a Joe Biden being sworn in on January 20th. Now, the backstop for that dark but probably improbable scenario is that if Trump delegates, Trump electors are sent by these 3 or 4 states, so Trump ostensibly is elected, then of course the electors have to be validated, approved, accepted by the Congress. And so the Senate under McConnell will readily do that. But under the House, the Democrats aren't going to do that. And so on January 20th, under the Constitution, the office of presidency is vacated because the House won't approve the Trump delegates. And therefore, there's no president and there's no vice president because the 4-year term has expired. So then the next in line is the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and that makes Nancy Pelosi the president. That being the case, I don't think the Republicans are going to follow this dark maneuver that I just described.
That is a very optimistic viewpoint, and it's the most powerful one to make me feel comfortable that I've heard so far. And given your experience as governor, and given that you're a lawyer, I assume the validity of everything you're saying with regard to them using those delegates that way, and then it has to pass. And I think it's very important for our listeners to know, Governor Brown, that such a move would clearly have to pass both the House and the Senate in order for Trump to be the next president of the United States or to be reelected. I got that right, correct?
Yes. Well, the Constitution, yeah, and the provision in the Constitution that's relevant, it states that the legislators shall select the electors, and it's the electors that elect the president. Well, unfortunately, from my point of view, these last states that Trump won, that he flipped from that Trump one.
Well, the Biden one.
The Biden one that were flipped from Trump from 2016. They're all controlled in the legislature by Republicans. But luckily, Nancy Pelosi will be the speaker, and therefore, what they might do would be negated by that. So they probably won't do it.
You're saying that Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada are all controlled in their
No, not Nevada, but Wisconsin.
Wisconsin. What about Pennsylvania?
That's Republican.
It's Republican. So
And
those
Michigan.
20 votes,
And
20
Michigan.
votes could go to Trump.
It could theoretically, but I don't think that would hold water. Or if it did, Pelosi would be the acting president because the House would never accept it.
Governor Brown, what literally, I'll wait a second there for that.
Yeah,
What literally happens if I'll give you a second. What literally happens if Biden continues to lead in Pennsylvania by over 40,000 votes, which he is now, and then the legislature gives all the electoral votes to Trump? What happens? Do you know?
Well, first of all, I think that's going to be just as you stated. It would be so unconscionable that somehow I don't think they would have the chutzpah to do that. But if they did, then the electors uh, are somehow, they have to be approved by the Congress. And the Congress is divided between Democrat and Republican, so that you would get a stalemate. And if you get a stalemate, you don't have a president. But we know by operation of the Constitution, the president's term is over by January 20th. There's no more, so there would be a vacant office. If there's a vacancy, you go down to the next in line. And the vice president would also be vacant under the same theory. And therefore, you go to the next one, which is the Speaker of the House of Representatives. So that's the improbable scenario. But it does raise the question that our democracy is on shakier foundations than most of us assume. And we better figure out a way to get it clear so these votes are not so much in doubt. We know clearly what the result is, instead of having these disputes where major personalities, mostly Republicans, are saying, hey, Biden didn't get these votes. Well, I think he did, but we better, for the future, improve our methodology so it's absolutely crystal clear. And that'll probably take some kind of federal rules or interstate compact to make the election rules very, very clear, clearer than they are now.
Are there other maneuvers, there are other tactics that Trump can take to try to outwit the system and attempt to get to stay in office or to be reelected, other than what you're saying about getting the legislatures to betray the voters who told them what to do by their votes?
Well, the only other one would be to declare himself president for life or for the next 4 years and call upon the army to defend him. That's what happens in banana republics. Hopefully, we're not there yet. And the military, he just fired the Secretary of Defense, so we can. So that's somewhat of an ominous sign. And the Secretary of Defense said he was not a yes man, and that's why Trump fired him. So who knows? Tune in, but I don't think the Army is going to support him. He's not. I don't think Mr. Jim Mattis, the former Secretary of Defense, is happy with Trump. I don't think the just fired Secretary of Defense is very friendly. So I'd say the Army will be on our side, but the mere fact that we're even discussing it indicates that America has some vulnerability that should be addressed by the next Congress.
So it sounds like our listeners can feel secure that other than a military coup, there are no legal avenues for Trump to take over.
That's right. So I think we can rest there, but it's good to stay on high alert.
I get a question from Dr. Nick Cozy, who's at he's a psychopharmacologist at the medical school at the University of Wisconsin. And Dr. Cozy wants to know, do you have an opinion on the popular vote versus the electoral college?
Well, I used to put up with or accept the electoral college, but now when I see such a divergence, that it really is becoming intolerable. We have to do something. I don't know how we can get rid of the electoral college, because it would take a 2/3 vote of the Senate, and then in the House too, and then you got to get 3/4 of the states. So the Republicans could block that. There is another movement that some states have adopted, that they pass a law that instead of their electors following whoever was elected by their state, they follow who was ever elected by all the states. So that means the winner of the vote, of the majority vote, not winner of all the states, but winner of all the votes, that state would follow that. So in this case, if Alabama passed this, even though Alabama voted for Trump, since the majority voted for Biden, the votes of Alabama would be counted for Biden. So that is a strategy that could be passed by statute, but it would take a majority of the states to do that, to make it effective. So that's another movement that is currently going on. California has already passed a law, and several other states have, but we're a long way from bringing about that as the general condition of the majority of states.
We would need a simple majority of the states to pass that?
You need a majority in each of the states that would line up for enough votes enough votes to be the winner. I haven't worked out the mathematics, but the people working on this have been doing it for years, and they feel this is a possible correction in the Electoral College.
Governor Brown, you've told us about your thoughts about Joe Biden and the job that he has before him. And it's known that he is a person who has reached across the aisle, so to speak, throughout his career. When I talk to people on both sides of the aisle, one of the things that I hear from the present president's side is a tremendous amount of both fear and antipathy towards Kamala Harris. What role do you see Kamala Harris playing in this tactic or this plan to hopefully unite the country?
I think she'll play a subordinate role, as vice presidents do. I think it was John Nance Garner who said the vice president wasn't worth a bucket of hot spit. I believe he said that in the 30s. So, but it's become more important in recent years. Cheney, as vice president, certainly helped bring about the Iraq War and several other debacles. But generally, the chain of command for a president reaches from the White House down through the cabinet secretaries, through the operating arms of government. The vice president does not have a lot of authority, if any, under it. I mean, it's basically a lady in waiting for the president to somehow go away. And then the vice president automatically is president. Same thing with lieutenant governor. Lieutenant governors, certainly in California, don't have much to do except when the governor is dead or something happens. So, but having said all that, it's not as important as it sounds, vice president of the United States. But she is, if you compare her to the vice presidents we've had, she stands right up there as a solid choice. She's smart. She's been a prosecutor locally. She's been attorney general, a senator. Yes, she's young, but not so much younger than other people who've served as president and vice president. I think she's solid, and I think she's not perfect. And if you want to focus on flaws, yeah, they're flaws, but so do all. As we now know, everybody's got flaws. It's not just white men who are doing all the bad. There's women, there's people of color. So there's a lot of flaws in humankind. But I would say specifically, Kamala is going to do a good job. She's a nice balance. Biden is older. She's younger. So I think that combination will serve the country well and serve the political environment well.
She's not as young as you were when you started as governor of California, which was the 5th largest economy, I believe, on the planet. Is that correct?
Well, it wasn't it was probably the 8th when I was elected in 1974. But I don't know what people look. Some of the people on the left don't like Kamala because she prosecuted criminals and didn't prosecute certain police officers who were charged with misconduct or shootings. Okay, but you can say that about any district attorney.
Sure.
Then you have on the Republican side, people are saying, and Trump, who's saying she's a communist. Well, she's not. That is crazy. She's a very ordinary, of some extraordinary attainment, but she's a pretty ordinary American when it comes to the values that she lives and that she represents. She's, I think, very typical of normal, ordinary Americans. And the people who call her some kind of lefty or communist are even more wrong than those people on the left who are worried about her because she's too conservative in their minds.
She is saying to every Black child on the planet that this is possible. And that in and of its, right? That in and of itself is a very powerful statement.
It is a powerful statement. And that's good role for the vice president.
And just as Obama said to every young person of color on the planet that this is possible.
It's
So,
possible. That's good. But you notice Obama said we're entering a post-racial period, but we're not. So race, ethnicity, these things are still of great concern to millions of people. So we're not done yet with our transformational work in American politics.
well, you've offered us what I consider to be a very optimistic view with regard to the presidency going forward. I do have one question. If Nancy Pelosi were to become the president under the scenario you described, whereby it was the president is no longer the president and Biden does not get seated, the Speaker of the House becomes the president. Does the Speaker become the president temporarily or for the entire year, or how does that work, Governor Brown?
Well, she would act as president until a new president could be seated and sworn in. But if there's a stalemate and the House refuses to accept the Republican electors that come from states where Biden won, then we're in a stalemate. And I suppose you'd have to wait another 4 years, which seems completely improbable. And therefore, I think the Republicans, before they jump into that cauldron, will pull back and say, okay, I guess Biden is better than Pelosi.
And who's in line after the Speaker of the House? Do you know?
I think maybe McConnell. I'm not sure. I'm not sure who's in line. So my knowledge, I should know that, but maybe it goes to the Secretary of State of the United States. I'm not sure.
I'm getting something here from Haines, Alaska, and Gershon is saying that the compact to circumvent the Electoral College does not need a majority of the states to succeed. If states that together account for 270 electoral votes all agree to do it, then whomever wins the popular vote will have the electoral votes needed to be president without literally eliminating the Electoral College.
Yeah, but what happens? Okay, that's if each of the states that sign up on that compact equal 270, but what if one of those states are not one? So you don't have 270 yet. I got the idea. They think it can work, and you just stated how it can work. But hopefully we can get back to, it's possible. What can I say?
Yeah, thanks for that, Gershon. And remember, the rest of you, that if you want to text in, like Gershon just did and Nicholas just did from Wisconsin, Gershon from Haines, Alaska, 650-TALLY-HO. Text to 650-TALLY-HO, or you can call that number, 650-TALLY-HO. So I did get another note here, Governor Brown. It's on a different topic, but maybe we'll give it a go here. Somebody anonymous wants to know if you will share any thoughts on homelessness, particularly solutions for the West Coast.
Wow. Well, I think that's obviously it's a very difficult problem. It's gotten much worse in recent years. It's a result of many factors. It's not a one cause that you can just pick up and change and have it all done. There's the disappearance of affordable housing. And some of that affordable housing was pretty bad, but at least it was a roof over their head. And some of them were flop houses or cheaper rundown buildings, but people were within some kind of shelter. And then there weren't as many people who were cut adrift. Now, some of that is mental health, some of that is drug addiction, or both. And then there's all sorts of things going on with jobs not being available, people not suitable, Who the heck knows how many factors? So that's the problem. Now, it isn't enough to just say, okay, we have 140,000 people. We're going to get 140,000 apartments, and we'll give them to these people at a discount or for free. Many of these people are severely disturbed and challenged, so they're going to need a psychologist. They're going to need helpers. They're going to need somebody to look after them, and they're still going to fail. So we used to have mental hospitals that probably covered a number of the people, not all, but a significant number of these homeless people are paranoid. They want to be outside. They don't even want to be in some kind of a shelter. And who knows what's brought them there. So we had almost 30,000 people, not quite that many, but just take that number for example, 30,000 people in 1960 in mental hospitals in California, locked up. Now we have less than 1,000, all right? But we have 2.5 times more people, and we're not saner. We're just as crazy as we were 2.5 years ago. So by rights, we ought to have 70,000 people locked up if we were following the same principle. Well, we didn't like that. We found abuses there. So we closed the mental hospitals, closed all over America, not just California. And now the new mental hospital are tents out on the sidewalk, or people living in canyons, or people living near the Sacramento River here in Colusa County, not too many. So what do you deal with it? I think you got to, first of all, you must push some of these people in treatment. I don't believe you should be able to shoot up drugs on the streets of California or anywhere. I don't think you should let people do that. That's a crime. And arrest them, prevent them from harming themselves, and then give them drug treatment, and then slowly get them back into society, help them. If they don't make it, you got to lock them up again. And now maybe you lock them up in some humane setting, but you just can't let the population of the people that are now on all the streets do what they're doing. Now, there are people who just need a hand. They need an apartment. They need a subsidy, and they need help getting a job. Well, we ought to work on that. Now, can we do that? Well, let me just give you one startling figure. If you want a subsidized apartment in San Francisco to build a new one, you need a public subsidy, tax dollars of $600,000 per unit. In poor, cheaper places out in the valley, maybe it's $350,000. But if you multiply 114,000 times, say, $350,000 or $400,000, you're talking tens of billions. So that's not likely to happen. So what's the answer? I think the answer is to continue to build more housing. I think you've got to have more intervention for the people who are really not within their normal frame of mind, I guess we don't say crazy anymore, but they're intellectually challenged in a rather severe way, and they're self-medicating. So I think we got to do something about that. And I would take a more, I would say, humanely authoritarian approach, because I think without it, you're leaving people to destroy themselves. And the family, there's so many different people. There's single men, there's people who are drug addicted, there's people who are paranoid and bipolar, and there's just people who have really come on hard luck. So yeah, it's a big problem. Are we going to get to tens of billions? No, the money is going to be going to other things. They don't have, so it's troubling. As you can tell, I'm struggling with the right response, but we've had it. It's getting worse, and there's nothing on the table that is clearly going to make it better. So I think there's more to be said, but I'm not prepared to say it this morning.
I appreciate that you're differentiating between different populations within the overall homeless population. I learned a great deal when we had a town hall meeting here in Fort Bragg on homelessness some years ago. And some people of the homeless population got up and spoke, and some of them were very articulate. Others spoke and they were not articulate, and others spoke and they were, I think the word we're now using is psychotic. And the ones who are articulate were very clear in teaching us about the various subpopulations within the what we call homeless population. Some of them prefer to refer to themselves as unsheltered because they see themselves as purposely making a choice to live that way, and they clearly differentiate themselves from those who are there because of other circumstances, such as what you point out, mental illness, and some from economic circumstances. One of the things that was very dramatic was when people who were obviously very middle class in their attire, mannerisms, posture, and speech got up to speak and identified themselves as homeless and talked about how they were living from paycheck to paycheck. And when they lost their job, they lost their home, and they were out on the street for the first time in their lives. And that was a very different population, particularly when this one woman spoke and talked about that situation. And then others in the audience, and the room was packed, raised their hands and said they were also in that category. At the same time, obviously, there are those who, as you point out, suffer from various, forms of illness. So I think it's important that we all remember that there are different groups within what we call the homeless population. When you mentioned that it costs $600,000 in California to buy a unit, maybe 350 somewhere more rurally, if we amortize that cost, though, over a 20 or 30-year period, if we amortize a 600,000 over a 30-year period, as the government does for amortization, it comes to $20,000 a year. And that $20,000 a year might be less than what each of those people is costing us presently by being on the street, using emergency rooms and fire departments as their health facility, and so on. How do you think about that? Does that make
first
sense?
of all, well, it may make sense, but you got people who, the school teachers want more money, the firefighters want better pensions, the in-home supportive services people, the prisons require ever-increasing funds. There's many, many calls on the government dollar. So if you're going to be providing a $20,000 a year rent payment or mortgage payment, that's got to compete. And there's one other problem, is that if we take care of, let's say we magically gave decent shelter to 130,000 people, would more people then join the ranks of the unsheltered to get that free apartment? So sometimes when you alleviate a problem, you incentivize the behavior that constitutes that problem. Now, I think that's a kind of an old psychological law or experience that if you reward something, you get more of it. And this would be some kind of a reward. So I think one thing I didn't mention, we need this investment in jobs, in infrastructure, in retrofitting buildings. And if we had those jobs available and they could support a family or an individual, that would at least provide an employment outlet. Now you've got other people who can't work. We do have people, and they go on SSI, and that's available. People who are really disabled, physically or mentally, or as people get old, they also can get on. If they're not on Social Security, they can get on what is SSI. So there are a lot of ways to handle different people in our society, but not everybody is your. Many, many people are going to have problems, and I think this is one to work on. And I'm sorry I can't give you more. Maybe somebody you can interview will tell you. But remember, ask how are you going to get that money? What's the bill? Is it $5 billion a year? $10 billion? How we do it? You say, well, we ought to do that. Well, I could tell you we ought to do more for people coming out of prison to give them a reentry opportunities. Many of them are homeless and they need job skills, and they find it very hard to reenter community. So there's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot in the schools. There's a lot of kids. In fact, half the kids who are way below grade average, and they're the poorest kids for the most part. Well, they need a lot of help, and there's a lot of things we ought to do on that front. So there's plenty of need, And part of the dismal science of economics is we got to make tough decisions with the available resources that we got.
I have a question for you here from Joe Billman in Oakland. Joe Billman has a very interesting business. He stores wine for people and he oversees it with video cameras from anywhere in the world. And his question is, what are your thoughts about repurposing now obsolete shopping malls and other redundant real estate and using those facilities for financially and socially disadvantaged people? The owners of these properties are presently looking at a huge financial loss, and he thinks they would happily take subsidies or tax credits for this purpose. What are your thoughts?
Well, there's a lot of little strip malls and there's larger malls, and some of them a lot of them may not make it. So yeah, that becomes an area of available real estate. Now, that still doesn't build you a house or an apartment, and it doesn't provide you the money of the services that would have to go with it. So we still get back to the same problem. What is the most effective, efficient, humane way of dealing with people who are on our streets and don't seem to find a way to proceed to a better life? I've laid out all that I can say about it, and I think it would be very worthy that you get some smart person on your show and you ask them these tough questions. Somebody who's working on the problem. Out here in the ranch, we got to deal with coyotes, rattlesnakes, mosquitoes carrying the West Nile virus, and that's that's our problem. So we've kind of escaped the urban environment, and I'm going to leave that to you.
I will take that. And I'm familiar with the rattlesnakes, but I'm not familiar with our neighborhood having these mosquitoes of West Nile virus, and that's concerning to me. Have you actually encountered some of them on your?
Well, I encountered mosquitoes, and so far none of us had West Nile virus, but it's in Sacramento. A few dozen people have died over the last 10 years, so it's real. Up there near the coast, you would probably have fewer mosquitoes.
No, we don't have them. Here I have a question for you from Dan Prince in El Centro, California. He says, with the defeat of Proposition 25, where do you see bail reform going in California?
Right back to where it was. That the fact they defeated that bill, it's like the legislature failing to pass the bill. So they'll go back, and I think they'll come up with something. This was an unholy alliance between the ACLU and other members on the left who felt that this bail reform would harm people of color. And on the other hand, the bail bondsmen like to be in the bail business, and so they provided their money, and then the ACLU and others raised doubts. And it's okay, so they killed it. Now let's make another one and try to and actually act to reduce this financial price on people getting properly allowed release pending their trial.
I want to remind our listeners that these texts that are coming in from Gershon Cohn in Alaska, Dr. Nicholas Cozy in Wisconsin, Dan Prince in El Centro, Joe Billman in Oakland, they're getting to us by texting 650-TALLY-HO, 650-TALLYHO. So send your questions. You can see we're responsive, and you see that Governor Brown is responding to every one of the texts that you send in. So thank you all for that. Governor Brown, there was an interesting experiment up in the state of Washington where they took people off the street who are alcoholics, and they put them in apartments. It was, very, very extremely modest apartments, and they supplied them with alcohol. And it was a very controversial study. The results were that the people cost the city and the state significantly less when they were provided with these very modest, shall we say, rooms or apartments and supplied with alcohol than when they were living on the street. However, the the negativity towards giving these folks a place to live, and particularly giving them alcohol, was dramatic. You want to comment on that at all?
Well, yeah, you could also give them psilocybin and marijuana and heroin and methamphetamine and other things. So, because that's what some people like. In fact, some people are addicted, so they need that. And whether they would be happy just shooting up in the modest apartment, I don't know. But I can't imagine the people, especially working class people, want to spend their tax dollar on creating that kind of a situation. So it might work. I think Aldous Huxley in Brave New World talked about a drug, soma. And I suppose we could get a lot
That's
of the
right.
people who are troublesome and get them a soma pill, and they would just be not particularly antagonistic to the rest of society. But that was a fantasy that was written in a book. I do think we have to deal with these problems on a more common sense basis. And whatever that is, I don't think people want to subsidize, and I don't subsidize that kind of behavior. I don't even know if it works, because people taking these drugs, they're going to OD, or they're going to want to go out and do crazy things. It's not very stable. The human mind has its own the body and mind has a type of homeostasis. If you start injecting these chemicals, you're going to upset the balances, and no telling what kind of bad things you're going to get yourself into. So I think while that might work on a short term, it's not something that's going to fly in the American society. It might not even, I don't know that it would work over a long period.
I've got an anonymous question here about marijuana. This person wants to know whether this increase that we're seeing around the United States in the legalization of both medical and recreational marijuana is going to lead to some kind of an epidemic of marijuana use. I think this is the same fear that people had with the end of prohibition, where they thought that there was going to be a tremendous increase in the use of alcohol. And of course, there are some who think that marijuana is soma because of the relaxation effects that it has. What have you heard about increase in marijuana use when there's legalization?
Well, I assume it's increasing, although the illegal businesses seem to be thriving, and the legal businesses are running into so many regulatory hurdles that they're not prospering so well. I would say that for the more radical folks, when they look at Biden being such a middle of the road kind of character, they're going to get very frustrated, and maybe they're even going to get angry. So maybe they're going to need a certain amount of marijuana to calm them down over the next 4 years, because all this excitement, the Bernie Sanders, they're all revved up. The trouble is that isn't American society. We've got a conservative to moderate country with a few, so I say that humorously. I wonder about that marijuana myself. I mean, what does it do? I mean, can you keep doing that? I've known people who took marijuana every day of their life. I always, and a couple of people, the only thing I can tell from a very limited sample, that people who get high every day, they not that interesting. They strike me, these two always were a little bit dull and a little bit slow. I have a hunch that they thought they were more interesting, that life is showing up as more exciting. But when you had to spend time with them and talk to them, it wasn't all that exciting. So I would just caution people that you may think things are going well when you're high, but maybe other people might not have the same impression.
Well, I can say this from a perspective of science, having studied alcohol and marijuana for at least 50 years, and that is that if it's a forced choice between the two, marijuana is safer to the human system than alcohol. It's less deleterious. And what we know, from research on crime in the United States, there's much less crime associated with marijuana. That I see you shaking
That's
your head.
true.
You know that.
Well, I mean,
And with
people get drunk. Some people become real mean drunks, and when they get behind the wheel of a car, yeah, we got lots of people, millions, that are suffering because of alcohol abuse. That's for sure. Hey, we didn't talk about nuclear or climate, and we only got 3 minutes. Can I
Well,
say a couple of things about
actually,
that?
Governor Brown, I was told that you're available to stay on after 10, and so that's why I wasn't pushing us. Am I
Okay, but
correct? Are
well,
you
a
are you
little bit,
available?
a little while. No, I don't have too much time because
Well, then let's move directly into climate change.
yeah, with climate change, uh, we can say so much about it. The point being that California is doing quite a lot, but what we need to do is a lot more. Getting to zero carbon emissions, or getting close to that, and then getting sequestering carbon from the atmosphere and putting it under the ground. That is going to be enormously difficult, both reducing emissions and then sequestering whatever the residual emissions there are. But we have to do it. And whatever it takes to avoid real disruption, massive fires, rising sea level, tropical diseases, all sorts of bad outcomes, and migration driven by bad climate and crop failure. All of that's true. It's not going to happen overnight, but we're going to have more and more of it. So we are on now a course to reduce our carbon emissions and almost virtually eliminate them by 2050. That's where the world's going. We're not going to get there in a straight line, but it's going to cost money. It's going to have setbacks, but there we are. And it's going to require quite a change. If you just think about all the gas stoves in the world, well, you got to replace them with electric, and the electric has to come from renewable energy. For the billions of people on planet Earth, that's a big job. But if we undertake it, as we have to, that'll also provide a lot of local jobs, and it will be a very exciting adventure as human beings finally get with nature instead of trying to beat nature, which you can't do. The rules of physics and biology are going to overcome us who are trying to screw around with it too much. So climate change is here. The response is imperative. We know what we got to do, and it's going to take the next 30 years, and it has to be with Chinese partnership, Indian, South American, Russian, Europe, Africa. We're all in it. So this is one of the first things that we're all in it together, and that it could be a very good thing, and what I call a philosophy of planetary realism. So instead of just thinking about what's good for America or China thinking about what's good for China, we have to look at those interests that we share in common. And the climate and avoiding the virus, that is something we all share. So those mutual interests can become the basis for a realism in our geopolitics, in our domestic politics. And that's what I call planetary realism. And it doesn't exist today. Politics is all about nationalism, national ego, me against you, America against China, man against the environment. Well, we got to get off that and get to understand we're in an interacting mutual dependency among our 7 billion, 7.8 billion humans, and all the other billions of species. We're all tightly woven in this web of life. And we're becoming aware of that. And so we're going to have to modify our behavior that will have to be based not on, Adam Smith or capitalism, but on a real planetary realism of what it takes to survive and thrive in the kind of world that we've been given.
In another interview, which I hope you will participate in, I want to talk to you about possible alternatives to capitalism. For now, I want to ask you, do you see any one person or persons who have the stature or gravitas to stand up on the world stage and talk about us as a planet dealing with climate change?
Well, as you put it, a person with stature to talk about what I would call planetary realism, talk about our place among the web of life with all the other species. I haven't heard politicians talk that way. They talk about a lot of things, and Biden is coming closer to speaking to the danger. And European politicians have spoken about this, and others in the world. But the clarity that is required, and it's not just, by the way, the climate. It's habitat destruction and species extinction. Edward O. Wilson from Harvard, preeminent, has told us that if we want to just maintain 80% of the species that currently exist in the world, we have to leave half the earth alone, leave it undisturbed like a park. Well, wow. You tell me I got to get rid of my car, my fossil fuel car, my gas stove. Now you're telling me I got to leave the shopping mall, not some kind of homeless village. You got to be a park for the animals. Well, the birds, the bees, the mosquitoes. So humankind is in for a very rude shock. We're not king of the world. We are part of the world, and we have to adjust ourselves to accommodating these other species, which we depend on. And so, because if you get rid of too many of them, maybe there's some kind of ecological collapse. So is anybody talking at that level? No. Writers do, professors do, but not politicians.
I don't understand that. It confounds me. I don't understand how we can have a world with so many countries and so many leaders and not have one, two, or three who know what you and I are talking about right now. And we don't have one, two, or three who will stand up on the world stage and call for us to stand together as a planet. And I was hoping, but so far it's not happening, that perhaps the COVID pandemic would pull us together, that someone would stand up on the world stage and say, hey, this is a planetary pandemic. That's why it's called a pandemic. And we need to act together in cohesion together to deal with this thing, not deal with it in cities and states and countries, but also deal with it on a planetary level. But no one is doing it. And that confounds me. I don't understand that.
Well, because nationalism, first of all, we as individuals, we're very egocentric. And then as countries or as communities, we're very ethnocentric. And that is powerful. But transcending that, of course, are these new global realities of virus, nuclear danger, climate change, habitat destruction. So I think it's going to lead in that direction. And I hope it will lead in that direction in enough time that we can preserve what is needed to preserve humankind and a benign environment as we currently possess. But I think there are people, I think Joe Biden is going to come closer here. But again, he talks about the Green Deal as a jobs program. Well, that's true. And that's something that people ought to realize. But it's not just jobs, it's biology. It's a viable living strategy compatible with existence as we now scientifically know it to be. So we're not in some antiseptic, some kind of a sphere, in some kind of a bubble where there's not organic connection to all these other species and soils and microbial activity. So we're embedded in the kind of world that contemporary politics doesn't normally recognize. But because the scientists are speaking more effectively, international tribunals and agencies are reflecting all this, we are on the road to greater awareness in the world. And it's really a race between increasing awareness and the destruction by our own human technologies, like nuclear, like bioengineering and terrorism, like the climate destruction, like the elimination of 30% of the species that might all of a sudden make our life impossible. So I think we're at a very fermenting, fruitful, yeasty, if I can reach for that metaphor. We're in a very exciting period, and the outcome is not clear. These people say optimism, pessimism. No, we don't know that. All we can do is be clear, and there's nothing assured other than the fact that human beings are going to do something. And hopefully that something will become progressively enlightened as scientists make their reports and as the facts of the human impact become clearer and clearer to powerful people.
So we're still in conflict between America is for Americans and give us you're tired, you're weak, you're hungry, aren't we?
Oh yeah, well that's we got a wall, and probably I don't know that all 70 million Trump voters like the wall, but probably 65 million or some big number, a big number that's not a handful of people sitting on a bar stool complaining. This is tens of millions of red-blooded American men and women who say, "Right on, wall. We need a wall. We don't want that Statue of Liberty stuff." Oh, they don't put it quite that way, but that's the
No.
implication.
Well, we've got to spend a little time on nuclear proliferation, and I want to hear some about your work with the Bureau of Atomic Scientists.
All right, I'll be quick because all these topics you could go on for hours and days. So the point you need to know about nuclear weapons: there's 9 nuclear weapons nations in the world. And I might just say, by the way, North Korea, from the best judgments that I've heard, can deliver a missile to California, no doubt. So if Trump wants to attack North Korea, it may be at the sacrifice of Los Angeles or the San Francisco Bay Area. So it's probably not going to happen. So 9 nuclear weapon states. Russia and the US have 90% of the nuclear weapons. Together, they have about somewhere about 14,000. Of the 14,000, several hundred are located on intercontinental ballistic missiles that are ready to fire in minutes. Now, when do they fire? Well, right now they are programmed, they are organized by the software and by the thinking of the people who are the custodians in the various silos in Montana and North Dakota. They're to be fired when they get an alert that the Russians have fired their missiles. Mm-hmm. Now, the problem with that is twice in the past, the alert has gone out that Russia has fired nuclear missiles at America. And it turned out it was false. Bill Perry said he was woken up in the middle of the night as Secretary of Defense, and they said the missiles are on their way. You better tell the president. He said, well, we're not going to tell the president. He thought it was false. It turned out to be a computer error. It was a training tape that had been put in by mistake. So, by the way, the Russians had the same thing. They had a report on their computer network. The radar said America had launched 200 missiles. And a guy named Petrov refused to pass the command up the chain, and he was fired. But he was the great hero of humanity, because if the Russians had fired, then we probably would have retaliated. We had a general nuclear war, and billions would have died. So we are secure in this call by luck and by software, and software that fails. And the more complex we make these weapons, and they are complex, and particularly the ICBMs that are fired, so the president only has 20 minutes. If he gets the report the missiles are coming, then he has to decide to fire. Of course, if he fires, he can't stop the Russian missiles. Our defense systems are completely imperfect. At best, they're going to get a couple of missiles. But that doesn't mean that dozens or hundreds can get through. So if that's coming, we're going to suffer a nuclear attack. Now, the only thing we can do, we can't defend ourselves. We're dead. But we could kill millions. And since we're going to have so much nuclear bomb and so much dirt, we're going to have a nuclear winter. So billions are not going to have any food for several. So the only defense we have is the threat to end humanity by our engaging in nuclear exchange. Totally insane. But that is the doctrine of Russia and America and these other nuclear powers. So we are now, US and Russia, are engaged in massive modernization to make new, shiny intercontinental ballistic missiles, new nuclear warheads, new submarines, new airplanes, new torpedoes that can go under. I mean, it's crazy. And what is the whole basis? The basis is we defend ourselves by threatening annihilation. And because the other side knows annihilation is waiting for them, they act with restraint. But in order to have the restraint work, we have to constantly escalate to a higher level of lethality and danger. That's where we are. And instead of worrying about a bolt out of the blue, Russia says, let's go get America, or China says that, we have to worry that the software fails or we get a crazy man. Like, for example, the president alone can order a nuclear strike today. He can order that, and there's nobody who can stop him. He is the president. He goes right to strategic command over there. I think it's NORAD in Omaha, and say, fire. I don't know what they do. Cart them away, whatever. We need to fix that. We need to take the weapons off alert. We have to take the warheads, put them a ways away from it. And then we got to negotiate reductions and create some trust between Russia, China, and America. People would say, you can't trust them. Well, if we don't trust them, we're going to only operate on fear. And fear leads to more acts on the basis of fear, which is more nuclear weapons. And therefore, at some point, the system of software and human control will fail, because they have to make all the decisions in a matter of less than an hour. So by far less than an hour, because the missiles are in the air before our radar detects them. So anyway, it's a crazy world, and it is not an issue that very few people even know about it, even care about it. It was not an issue in the campaign. It's not an issue that the Washington Post or the New York Times will give much copy to. I tried to put an op-ed on this topic, and they refused it. In fact, I wanted to put an op-ed in the Washington Post saying 5 steps to reduce this nuclear danger, this danger of a blunder and a mistake. And they said, no, we can't publish it. And on the very day they told me that, they had an opinion piece by a chicken, by the chicken mascot from the San Diego sports team, that has a guy who dresses up as a chicken during the sporting events. And that chicken wrote an opinion piece sharing the experience of what it's like to be a chicken mascot. So that was more important, probably because it would get more clicks, because this business of what I'm just saying won't get you clicks. And if you don't get clicks, then what's the newspaper going to do? That's kind of what they do. That's their business, to see if they can get more and more people tuning in. Anyway, I'm not giving up. I am the chairman of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. We put out the doomsday clock. We'll put it out in January. We're currently 100 seconds before doom, before a nuclear exchange. And it's as close as we've ever been, even during the height of the Cold War. But we're working to get awareness. It's good we're talking about it, but I would just challenge your listeners. Notice when the next time you hear anything of what I've just said, and they should call you. They should call you and tell you, because I don't think they'll hear very much. I think the next time you're going to hear about nuclear is when one of them goes off. Or I guess the next time will be when Biden signs the New START agreement and begins in good faith to negotiate with Putin. That would be a big step forward. The problem is that many people around Biden and in Washington, they hate Putin. So because they hate Putin, they say, we're not going to talk. And so Putin's there building 5 new nuclear weapon systems. And the answer is, in Washington, let us build even bigger and better and meaner nuclear weapon systems. And then as soon as Putin sees that, he says, well, look what the Americans are doing. My 5 is not enough. I need 10. And then when we see that, oh, look what Putin's doing. We're going to need more. We're on a never-ending escalation that can only end in one of 2 outcomes. I'll tell you what they are. Either nuclear annihilation or mutual trust. Those are the 2 options. And we're a long way from trust. I hope we're a long way from annihilation.
I'll give you a third possible option. I heard a story that Mao was talking to Khrushchev, and Khrushchev got nasty, and he threatened. And Mao said to him, look, you have 300 million people. I've got 1.5 billion. I'll trade you. You take out 300 million of mine, and I'll take out 300 million of yours. You're obliterated, and I've got 1.2 billion left. You want to go at it? Let's do it. Don't know if it's true or not, but statistically it makes sense. What's holding China back from doing that, trading with 1 or 2 countries and then ruling the entire planet?
Well, the only problem with that is we now know with greater scientific confidence that a certain amount, probably 100 nuclear weapons of a certain magnitude, if set off, will put up so much material into the atmosphere that will block sunlight and make the growing of food impossible for several years. That it's not a certainty, but it's not a trivial possibility. It's a real possible outcome. And I assume those good engineers in China are aware of those things
Yes.
and they will avoid it, hopefully. But all this is hope. The hope is that nobody's crazy, that nobody, that we're all kind of sensible. Well, that wasn't true of Hitler. I don't think it was true of Nero. I don't think it was true of Genghis Khan. I don't know much about Genghis Khan. So it wasn't true of Charlie Manson. So there's a lot of crazy people and some of them get a lot of power. So it's imperative, as you suggested earlier, that the world leaders start talking and start facing the facts that the virus is not a China virus. It's a virus for all humankind. In fact, it's even going to minks and animals. So yeah, it's a planetary issue, and we got to get on it as planetary citizens. And I think I have some hope that Biden is going to take us a step in that direction. Of course, it depends. Will Putin make any accommodating steps? Will President Xi, will he feel, well, America's so weak and screwed up, I'll just start moving even further in my ambitions? What if President Xi thinks of himself as Teddy Roosevelt? Teddy Roosevelt, he was down there fomenting insurrection against Colombia to create the state of Panama so we get the Panama Canal. I think it was either him or one of these guys. But then we had to go to the Philippines, kill 100,000 Filipinos and make that our colony. And this great kind of robust imperialism, we've had that before. We have. In fact, under President Polk, we sent our army down to Mexico and we took half of Mexico. That's Texas and New Mexico and Arizona, Colorado, California. So maybe President Xi might emulate American history. That would be very bad. So somehow we got to get on track here to negotiate reasonably, smartly with the big powers. And then when we get that done, we got to worry about the terrorists getting these new bioengineering capacities that could change the genetic structure of a virus and get it spreading all around. So humankind is on the brink of destruction. It's also on the brink of a lot of fabulous technologies and outcomes, and a lot of people are a lot better off. So we're on a high wire here without a safety net, and hopefully we can get to the other side.
If Joe Biden, President-elect Biden, calls you on the phone and says, hey, Jerry, I know you're an expert in this. Give me some advice about this nuclear issue. What do you tell him?
I tell him to get a couple of very smart people, send them over there to Russia, privately talk to President Putin, find out if there's any room for reduction in nuclear. Is there what agreements could be had? If Putin says, okay, we can do A, B, and C, they come back and work it out. Okay, then bring in the Republicans in the Senate and then make an announcement and set up a meeting in Helsinki like Reagan and Gorbachev and come together and say a nuclear war can never be won and must never be fought. That's what Ronald Reagan said. And so we haven't said that again. We haven't heard that from an American president since Reagan. So it'd be very good to get the two to say that and then to agree on a significant arms reduction. I'd start with a third, which is something that Obama had been contemplating before he left office. So there's a little two-step that I think he could follow.
Well, I promised you that we would not go for 2 hours. We're at about an hour, approaching an hour and a half, and you said you have other responsibilities to move on to. In conclusion, are there some things that you would like to share with our listeners before we sign off?
No, other than Colusa County is Trump country, but the people here are very neighborly, and it's quite a very good place to be. And even though I've been an urban guy and I'm no means a cattleman, even though I'm surrounded by cowboys, I find it a very good place to spend my 82nd year.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Governor Jerry Brown. I really appreciate your being with us today. And if it's not an imposition, I hope perhaps you'll join us again for another interview.
Look forward to it.
Excellent. And thank you all for joining me today for today's broadcast of Mind, Body, Health, and Politics. And special thanks to my producer, Charlie Deist, who makes this broadcast possible every week. Please join me again next week at 9 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, when we will once again bring you Mind, Body, Health, and Politics. Until then, this is Dr. Richard Lewis Miller reminding you that good health is worth fighting for, and it's essential for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The preceding program was brought to you by Wilbur Hot Springs and Thanksgiving Coffee. A note on Thanksgiving coffee. Thanksgiving coffee is made here in Fort Bragg, California. I live on a little farm called the J&R Farm. It stands for Jolie and Richard. And our farm eggs are so excellent that we're able to trade them for the world's best gourmet coffee from the Thanksgiving Coffee Company. When I drink coffee, I only drink Thanksgiving coffee because it's the best. And because the founder of Thanksgiving Coffee, Paul Katzeff, is a social worker and political activist who has improved the lives of millions of coffee growers around the world. Paul and I have mutual admiration. He appreciates and supports this broadcast, Mind, Body, Health, and Politics, and has created 3 special Mind, Body, Health, and Politics coffee blends. Then Paul doubles down and donates 20% of Thanksgiving Coffee internet sales of these 3 special Mind, Body, Health, and Politics blends to the COVID Response Network. Yes, 20% of internet sales go to the COVID Response Network, a nonprofit 501c3 whose mission is to protect California's North Coast from COVID. And I want to say that this COVID Response Network is doing a remarkable job here on the North Coast. A recent survey indicated that well over 90% of this local North Coast community are masking up, social distancing, and keeping the virus from spreading in a remarkable and dramatic way. So please go to the Thanksgiving Coffee Company website and buy Mind, Body, Health, and Politics coffee. Support the truth, support Mind, Body, Health, and Politics, and support the COVID Response Network. A word about Wilbur Hot Springs. You know, the autumn season is magnificent at Wilbur. We all know that. It's a wonderful place to get away and revitalize, and I know you're going to enjoy taking the medicine waters and hiking in the 1,800-acre nature preserve. You'll find plenty of lodging options, from camping platforms to cozy private cabins. Wilbur truly is a health sanctuary. Book a visit today at wilburhotsprings.com. Thank you once again for joining us today.